Welcome back, guys. This is another episode which is in continuation of the VIPER tutorial which we are doing. We are building an app called Green Grocery, where we started with creating a module for the VIPER architecture, and then today I'm going to concentrate on something where I have a custom control called add to back, which I'll be using in this project. So I just want to show you how we can actually utilize a view model to build or at least make it in a way that we can make it testable. So this intention of this tutorial is to actually show you the real purpose of, let's say, a view model, because nowadays I see that the implementations for view models as such by different developers are being done in a way where all of the use cases are getting ported from, let's say, a view controller to the view model. That's not the real intention behind creating view models. You can have view models even in a VIPER architecture project or even in an MVC project. So it's more like you are delegating some of the responsibilities or most of the responsibilities of your view to process it, maybe validate and everything to your view model, so that view just represents your data, whatever is being processed. So that's the intention of this tutorial. Let's continue with whatever we are planning to do. So let's get started. So as you can see, we have I have a custom control called add to back. It is nothing but has a add to back button. Then I have decrement and increment buttons, two of them, and then there is a stepper control where stepper label where you see that those values being changing. Like when you increment something, it steps up the value. So I've kept for this control, let's say I'm going to limit it to, let's say, I can add max of 10 items, and when it reaches 0, it again shows that add to back button. So this is like a toggle section. When add to back is there, this will not be, this bottom part will not be visible. So when I let's say add to back, it adds one item to the bag, and then this disappears, and I can keep adding on up to like 10 items to this cart. So that's the purpose of this control which I'm creating, which I'm going to use actually in the Green Grocery app, where each cell will have an item selection option. So from there itself you can add those items to the cart or something like that, to the bag. So let's just start with the basics. I just have the basic control right now with all the dependencies added. Let's say I have added all the buttons and the outlets along with the actions required. Let's say if I have click on the add to back button, what should happen? When I increment, what should happen? And when I decrement, what should happen? So this is, as such, I have created these controls. And also in my home view controller, I have if you go to my main screen, this is my home view controller. I have the overall control and just keeping a stack view as a container where I'll be adding this control. So that's what you can see in this. I have this container stack view, and I have this add back control instantiated, and then I'm just using this container view to add it. So one other thing I have used is something called as a view loadable extension, where I have a protocol defined. This is just an extension to actually instantiate a control. This will be available as part of the patrons site which I am maintaining, where you can see this code base. This is more like a utility protocol where you can instantiate your custom UI controls. Simply like if you implement it in a UI controller, if you have a view loadable, all that you just need to do is to point to the nib, which is this control here, and then rest of the things just this will take care. Like once you instantiate this control from your home view controller, you just need to call load from nib so that it instantiates this control. So that's the purpose of this view loadable protocol which I have created. So this, if you want to refer it, it will be available as part of the tutorial source code. If you want to have access, then you need to go to my patrons site to access it. So the link I'll be sharing in the description section of this tutorial. So let's continue with it. I have the buttons right now. Let's start implementing the feature I am right now talking about, because right now if you go to, let's say, device, where's my device? Okay, device is not detected, so I'll just run it in my phone access maybe. So it's still launching the simulator. So I just want to show you what is existing, what feature is there right now. So this is my simulator. So you can see I just have this control, and it's also showing those bottom section which I need to avoid right now. So it does not do anything right now. It just, once you click on it, nothing happens, because I'm not associated any validations or conditions for this to happen. So let's get started with that, where I need to start first with hiding these bottom section first. So maybe I'll start with let's say let's just have a function called configure or something. So even before that, let me just create a stepper value control, stepper value parameter, stepper value, which is of type int maybe. So initial value being 0, set it to 0, and also let's do a did set on that. So whenever this value gets set, we will keep adding those features here. Let's say if I have to, let's say if I have the add button, that should be hidden if the value of stepper is more than 0, something greater than 0. I don't need to show this. And rest of the things like the plus button will be the reverse of this. So maybe I can just grab this and make it as it is hidden. And minus. So the first idea is to get this working with a regular approach, where we will just use some variables to define the send and use. But then after this, we'll get to see how we can use a ViewModel to actually do all this, so that it becomes wholly testable. So I also will have one function called configure. Does nothing but just to configure the initial values. So maybe, so all I need is maybe the initial stepper value to be 0. When this gets configured, it sets the value, and then these conditions are applied. So let me just go to my home view controller and then do a control.configure. That's the only thing I'll do right now. This is nothing major, just doing this, just call configure. Now it should like enable and disable based on whatever we do. So let's run and see. So because that 0 is now set, you don't see that bottom section, because it is hiding based on this configure, and on the dip set, whenever the value is set, it will do all these operations. So now let's start implementing these things, like what should happen on add to bag and what should happen on when you increment and decrement. So first thing first, let me just when you do an add to bag, so let's set the stepper value to 1. So that's what will happen. Okay, and when the stepper value is incremented, we just increment it to 1, decrementing, set it to -1. And one other thing which you need to do here is to even set the value of the label here. So let's do that as well. Step label dot text is equal to the value of the stepper. So that's also done now. Let's see the result. Just run and see. Add to bag, it's setting it to 1. Increment, it increments the value, but you can increment it as much as you want, and also there is no lower limit set. So it's actually it will not create a problem here because it's just covering this with that add to bag, so it's already set to 0. So for the higher limits, let's do one thing. Even for the lower limit, when you're incrementing, let's guard it. Let's stepper value greater than or if it is less than 10, we'll do this, else we'll just return it. And when we are decrementing, let's also do a guard where when stepper value is greater than 0, you do the bottom thing, otherwise just return it. So let's do that guard. Now it should be fine. So if you go and look at it, add to cart plus 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 max 10. After that you can't increase anymore. Minus goes until 0, shows this. So we are fine with this implementation right now. So our basic control is working. So let's, whatever we did is just specific to this. And one more thing which we need to do right now is we need to get this value back to the view controller. So how can we do that? So let's create something here in this control itself. Let's create a closure. So I have this configure. I'll just do maybe I'll just call this as add to bag or bag closure, maybe it's easier. Bag closure, keep it as escaping, and then let's just return this stepper value, which will be of type string, or maybe okay, let's return a int here, and it's just void. So that's my closure, and maybe just keep it as a type alias. So call it bag closure. So because I'll be using it again later, we'll just keep it as is. So bag closure, and let's also create a variable for that. Just call this closure. Bag closure, and instantiate it when we configure it. Self dot closure is equal to bag closure. So that's all we are doing here. It will show a missing parameter because we need to pass it here. So it is as good as back closure. So we have this step value here. We'll be returning whenever that is changing. You will get that value here. Let's do just the print back step value, current step value, maybe just print that as step value. Okay, all good. So whenever the closure value changes, whenever the step value changes, that it will hit this closure. So we'll like to call this closure everywhere, self dot closure, and just pass the stepper value. So now it should be able to print it here. Let's see that once. Add to bag shows that the current step value is 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever we are choosing, it comes there. And even it shows that when it is 0, it is actually set it to 0 now. So we are done pretty much with this creation of this control, but then intention is to create a view model. So let's do that now. And let me just create a view model for this. I'll just call it as add bag view model. So let me create properties for that. One thing is like title for this control, which we have set right now as we have set it in the XIB itself. So we might just use whatever is provided by the this view model for setting that. Next is the step value, which we have maintained right now in the control. It's better that we keep it in this view model itself. A third one is show stepper, maybe. Excuse me. Show stepper is like this control. So this is my stepper. So when I add to bag, it should show this stepper, the bottom side. So that's my property called show stepper. So I can create an init for this where I can pass the title and the step value to instantiate. Show stepper is something which is related to the step value, so we can use it in the instantiation itself. So let's do the self dot title is equal to the title we are passing. Self dot step value is the step value, and self dot show stepper will be step value greater than 0. So that's the condition. So we have created a add bag view model which will directly represent our control. So with this it should be easier for us to test whatever needs to happen with this control. Let's say on increment what should happen, on decrement what should happen, on add to back what should happen. Everything will be handled by this view model. So even let's create an extension where we'll do the rest of the things, like on add to back what should happen. So let's create functions for that. On add to bag what should happen, it should return me the same view model, but a new view model with the new values. So let's just do that. It should return me add to bag add bag view model with the current title. It's not changing. Then the step value is actually changing right now. So on add to bag you have the step value incremented, so that one we will handle here itself. So it will be self dot step value increments by 1. So that's my new view model. So based on that, it will create this, and it will have a new value setting being happening here on this set. We'll do some stuff more. So this is my on add to bag. no, sorry, this is on add to back, which is actually setting the step value to 1. And let's do the other one on increment. What should happen? Again, same kind of things, return a view model, but in this case it will be incrementing this value. And on decrement, it should do this. So we are pretty much closer to what we are trying to achieve using ViewModel. So we have the whole ViewModel available right now, and we have this control, the actions on the actions on which these things should happen, the value being reset. So those things are available now. So one of the things which is going to change right now is, instead of the stepper value property, we will introduce our view model here. So this is going to be of type view model, and whenever it is set, the view model is set, you will have these things happening. So now these conditions are coming from the view model. So is hidden right now will be based on the view model dot show stepper. So when you need to show the stepper, let's do that, show, maybe let's keep it as is hidden itself. So when you need to show the stepper, hide your add button, and rest of the things will not be hidden. So it's just the change which happened is that stepper value is being replaced with the view model change. So this is what happens now. We don't need to actually reset this title because that's not changing much, so we can just ignore that one. The title anyway, once set is set, so we can just do this in the configure itself. So we don't have this anymore. Whatever we had as stepper, we'll just keep removing those. So I have this add button dot set title. So I'll just use the view model's title itself here once for the normal state. So that's not changing. Closure remains. So let's keep changing whatever we have modified. View model has now a show stepper, the stepper value property. Is it stepper value? What did we define? Step value. Okay. So it needs to have an initializer. Let's do that. That's it. And stepper value is going wherever we have used. Let's keep removing those. So we were setting it to 1. Instead, whatever is going to happen now is self.viewModel is going to be set to the current view model on add to back. So this is actually creating a new one and resetting it to the new view model. So it's not actually modifying the existing view model, it's just transforming it to a new one and resetting it. And our closure right now was accepting, we just need to send that value. Closure is accepting step value, so we'll just send that. Similar thing, we have this logic here which we can move to the view model, so that this control does not have to do much. So all the validation goes into the view controller. Let's just copy that. We already have this +1 logic there. Let's also move this to the view model, where on increment what should happen. So on increment, let's do a guard. So it says if the stepper value, we already have a property called stepper value in the view controller. So we'll just call it's not stepper but it's step value in this case. So if it is self dot step value is less than 10, we can return the current view model itself. That's what you are doing here. And on decrement, what should happen? The same conditions which we had for decrement. Again, if stepper value is greater than 0, return the same view model, else transform it and send it back. So even that is happening here now. Let's get rid of these things. All that we are left with is view model is step value. So same thing, we can just replace it. It's compiling fine now. So whatever we did is we have this bag values being we have transformed it into the view model. Instead of that step value, we have a view model now, and on view model changes, these things should happen. So one other thing we need to do is when we are configuring this function, we need to pass the view models or inject a dependency using the view model. We configure this using view model. Let's call view model, which is the add bag view model. So that's my view model, and once I receive that, I can set it here itself. So it should give me an error saying that I have not configured it. So I can pass it from here itself, like control creation. After that, I can create the view model to add back view model, and then maybe pass the title, which I have created as add to bag, and stepper value initial to 0. So I can just pass this view model while I configure. Need to pass the extra parameter. It should now compile fine. So whatever we did, let's have a review of it once. We replaced the step value property which we had in this. Instead we created a view model for that, and then had all the properties required to, or even actions to define whatever the control had to do. Let's say on add to back, what should happen, on increment, what should happen, on decrement, what should happen, what are the validations on when these actions are happening, and what even the title. Let's say even we could have even injected, let's say, something like the styling features of this, like the color, text, font, the font, everything. But that can also happen using some theme manager separately. So it need not be part of this, but can be part of a theme manager. So that configuration can happen separately. But then the idea was to make this, the idea of a view model MVVM architecture or as a design pattern was to do mainly this. When Microsoft WPF I don't remember the person who actually started using it in the WPF when they introduced the WPF. I can refer it back and come back to you in this comment section. But then that was the real intention, because they had data binding available, two-way data binding. They could actually use the capability of a view model to make it testable, so that a designer's job is to just to create the user interface side. He need not bother about all the data validations and everything, which becomes the sole responsibility of the view models. That was the intention behind this. So even in this case, we are doing, even if it is a simple application, even here we are doing the same. Like whatever validation, even if it is simple or complex, has to happen in the view models, and then whole responsibility of the view, or in this case the UI control, is just to display whatever is being input from the view model. That's the responsibility, nothing more. So that's what I was trying to do. Let's just run the application and see the final output. So I have the things still working on add to bag. It works. It's using now the view model to configure, and increment step value, but we just missed something. View model value is not reset. Let's just check that once. It's not resetting, so we just missed some calling this here. So it has to reset and then on increment and on decrement. So these are the actions which needs to happen on the view model side. So configuration initial one happens, add to bag works, validation works from the view model, goes back, and even it's printing those values. So even the closure is working now. So that's pretty much what I wanted to convey through this tutorial, where actually we are going to use MVVM in the VIPER architecture, because VIPER is different. It has different roles and responsibilities, but MVVM as such can be included, or it can actually be part of a VIPER architecture where its responsibility is only to do the UI side. It will work as your user interface. So that's the intention of this. Hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any queries, comment in the post your comments in the comment section. And if you want access to the code base, then you'll have to come to Patreon site. I'll provide the code base, the link to that, and then you might have to subscribe and to get the access to the source code. So until the next episode, bye from me.